The deadline for reaching an agreement to raise the debt ceiling fast approaching, 50 of the nation's mayors will meet in Los Angeles tomorrow to urge Congress and the White House to come together on a deal. One of those in attendance will be the mayor of Washington, D.C., Vincent Gray. Mayor Gray joins us now from our bureau. Mr. Mayor, welcome to Bottom Line. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Mr. Mayor, what do you want to hear out of these debt ceiling talks? We've been hearing reports the past couple of days that the Gang of Six seems to have made some headway, but there does seem to be some pushback from some members of the House of Representatives.
Well, I think fundamentally we want to see a solution. This has created such instability in our city and other cities that we've got to be able to have some predictability in going forward. We've been in a recession now for 3 years. Joblessness in our city is, at very high levels. Here in Washington, D.C., our jobless rate is 9.5%, but in some areas of the city it's as high as 17 to 25%. This just creates more uncertainty, more instability. So we want a solution, and we need it now.
Mr. Mayor, what would that solution entail?
Well, frankly, for us, it would entail something that says the debt ceiling will be raised, and that we won't imperil further the opportunity to create jobs in this economy. I'm looking for the opportunity to evaluate this new proposal that's been put on the table by the Gang of Six. It seems to have some promise. It's gotten some attention. But frankly, we've got to get our national lawmakers together on this with the president. You know, the House has a proposal that I don't think will go very far. We have this new Senate proposal, and the clock is ticking away. We've got barely 2 weeks left before we are at Armageddon.
Mr. Mayor, yesterday I interviewed Mike Crapo, the Republican from Idaho, and one of the final questions I asked him was about the toxic atmosphere in the nation's capital and how difficult it is to get jobs, or to get a job done, to get lawmakers to try at least to compromise for the good of the nation. You and the other mayors who are going to be meeting tomorrow in Los Angeles, is that of great concern to you? How is that gridlock in Washington handcuffing you as you attempt to do your job?
Well, again, it's unfortunate sending a message that partisan politics are the most important thing here, when in fact there's nothing more important than our nation's financial future. We've got to be able to get people to put aside whatever their partisan issues are, whatever their party politics may be, and recognize that this is one of the most serious issues that we faced in the recent past. Again, we've had an economy that has been in trouble for the last 3 years. Some of us are starting to see some of it turn around. Some of the joblessness was starting to dissipate. But this will further imperil us and put us right back in the worst situation than we've been in. So we want these lawmakers to rise above, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, to work with this president to find a solution so that this nation will be stable.
Mayor Gray, you're one of the mayors on the front lines in what's been going on, especially, as you mentioned, the last couple of years, and how this economic downturn has devastated a lot of cities. The city of Detroit, unfortunately, comes to mind in that regard. What's been the impact in your city? Aside from the jobless rate that you mentioned in Washington, it's at about 9.5%. How has the economic downturn affected your city?
Well, the jobless rate of 9.5% sort of belies the reality. Some parts of our city, there's a very low jobless rate of 2 to 3%. But in an area of the city where we have 140,000 people living, we have a jobless rate in one of those areas of 17%, where 70,000 people live, and then 25% in another area where we have 70,000 people living. It's an issue of not having the jobs and frankly, in a number of instances, people not having the skills. So we are at a point where we've got to begin to recognize that we've got to equip people with a skill set that they may not have at this point, and we've got to invest in job creation. The mayors have some ideas on how to do this, and I think our proposals ought to be strongly considered as we go forward. I think Washington, again, has not been hit as hard as others because of the federal government presence, the local government presence, and tourism. But even still, we've been hard hit by this recession, and it continues to pummel us.
Mayor Gray, with the amount of people who are out of work in your city, undoubtedly that will affect people's ability to pay their bills and maybe even stay in their homes. How has all of this affected Washington, D.C.'s tax base?
Well, we've actually seen some additional revenue come in the door, but that's largely because we've seen, increases in certain areas of our taxes. Our sales taxes, unfortunately, have been flat, and in some areas they've been down. Our commercial property taxes are up because there is a lot of building going on here. People still want to come to Washington, but I don't think that that's typical of the rest of the nation. Again, we're not seeing the level of job creation that we believe is necessary in order to get our people back to work. I was earlier today. We are doing a job fair with all the local universities that, in the aggregate, have 400 jobs to be filled. 6-hour job fair. In the first hour, there were about 1,000 people who showed up to apply for those jobs, which gives you a good indication of how desperate people are at this point.
Mr. Mayor, speaking of that desperation, if we could go back to the debt ceiling debate for just a moment. As you mentioned at the beginning of this interview, the clock is ticking down. What would be the implications for Washington, D.C. and for some of the other cities around the country if the debt ceiling is not raised? How will that impact you?
It would be absolutely devastating. It means that a lot of the cities would lose the federal funds that are the lifeblood. We've got people who depend upon temporary assistance to needy families. We've got Medicaid coming in to support people's health care. Apparently there would be no discretionary dollars coming from the federal government, which would imperil a lot of our transportation programs and other programs that we support. It's likely we would have to furlough some of our government employees who in fact depend upon federal funds to be able to work every day. I cannot imagine the level of devastation that would be done to this city and to others, and I can't believe that our lawmakers would be so irresponsible as to allow something like that to occur.
Sir, do you think a deal is going to get done?
I have to think that. I have to be optimistic about it. And it needs to get done now, because even once the deal is done, it's going to take some time to get it through the Senate, to get it through the House, to get it to the President for signature. So with August 2nd essentially upon us now, we need to move quickly. The lawmakers need to move quickly, working with this President to get this deal finished.
Vincent Gray, he is the mayor of Washington, D.C., joining us from our bureau in the nation's capital. Mr. Mayor, we thank you for your time today. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.